Welcome to Rise to Liberty podcast. If you are joining right now, make sure and hit that like, subscribe, share. That's the easiest way to help out the channel, especially with all of this soft censorship from our big tech overlords. And it's the best way to get this message out to as many people as possible. So today I am joined by Freya Lee, a representative of Trans Against Groomers. How are you doing today, Freya?
I'm doing okay. Crazy morning, like previously discussed.
Yeah.
Generally, that's been every morning for several months now, to be honest. I was waking up to a slog of information to comb through, of new information we find and research we've done and investigations we're currently doing, and to get more information out to the public to let people know what exactly we're fighting against and why we're here, despite all the propaganda to insanity to discredit us and our cause.
Yeah. So, do you want to give a synopsis of exactly what Trans Against Groomers are, what you're doing, what your mission statement is?
So, Trans Against Groomers is a group of trans people that most of us were in Gays Against Groomers originally. And we formed a sister coalition because they kept denying we were even existing in Gays Against Groomers at all and denying that we were even part of it. And so we did tag to highlight the trans people, and because of how many trans people were wanting to join up. Right now, we currently have 15 on the roster, but we have hundreds that are applying. We're just trying to set it up to streamline and do interview processes to add more people to our roster so we can reach a wider range of area to try and do as much good as we possibly can. We are all base transsexuals that don't believe in gender ideology. All of us are firmly rooted in our biology. And unlike other trans individuals most people are familiar with, they'll sit there and deny that they're biologically male and they have the same lived experience and shared experience as biological women. And we're like, well, no, because that erases them and us at the same time doing that. And we are not the same lived experience. We go through a completely different lived experience growing up as the opposite sex and then going through the process of transition. And that isn't the same as living as a biological woman. Um, to my dismay, I'll never have a period. I will never produce large gametes. To be honest, I don't produce any gametes, but that's the point, is like trying to get the truth back out there. And we end up running, like I have personally run into individuals like the one that I sent you last night, and that person is a vile monster, and
Yes.
they represent everything that we fight against. And I've run into those personalities before on many occasions. And I was like, I can't believe they're not being banned. And I can't believe they're allowed to exist so openly and unchecked. And it bothers the living hell out of all of us that they're doing all this in our names. And they're getting this far in our names, using us as meat shields to their ideology while we're taking all the hits. And
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. Like, I would love to know per capita how many of the people are actually transsexuals and their movement versus the people that are pushing it the hardest and loudest, because most of the time it's usually people that are have trans friends that they're fighting on behalf of and doing this for, but they'll never say who their trans friend is, and they never seem to join the conversations. It's always them puppeting out their trans friend, and they're the reason for them doing this and them fighting for this. And it's like, well, I'm trans and I'm telling you I don't want this and I want nothing to do with this. And all of us have run into those problems. Like, look at Buck Angel. I've had
Yeah.
so many people come after me over Buck Angel and his porn career, telling me how because Buck Angel did porn, that it's his fault that trans got mainstream. And I'm like, but that makes no sense because porn
That's
existed before Buck
ridiculous.
Angel. And it drives me crazy. And he gets attacked all the time for that. And there is a sect of people that somehow reasonably in their mind, delusionally in mind, believe that if porn didn't exist, trans wouldn't exist. And I don't even know how you can make that connection.
Um, Okay.
Yeah, it's a
That's not
Herculean
the
leap in logic.
craziest thing I've ever heard, but that's up there.
But
It's
yeah, and
hmm,
we just want to save children, and we want to distinguish that this is a medicalized space, and that the harm being caused by GnRH, aka Lupron, aka puberty blockers, and that's like one of the main reasons I got into this and the argument about trans women and women's sports with how they went after Taylor Silverman and went after her family. And that part, like, with everything combined, I couldn't take anymore, and I had to get online, and I had to start pushing and doing activism and fighting this fight. And like, we have literal doctors' offices and transition clinics and literal medical professionals lying about the harm caused by GnRH, and they'll end up saying how it's completely reversible. And it's like, well, how's sterilization reversible? On top of that, it's not like it reverses entropy and turns back time, that they can go back to being 13 as soon as they stop taking Lupron. And it does cause harm to the pituitary gland too. And there are so many side effects, especially long term, that people don't even consider. We finally just got the FDA to admit that there is bone density loss and osteoporosis in bone spurs and organ failure related to Lupron and GnRH.
wow.
And how is that reversible? Like, everything, like, there's so much misinformation about this, it's not even funny.
Yeah.
And like other information within the trans community, like how D-trans are treated. And we wanted to create a space where we weren't rejecting D-trans, and we were instead platforming them and letting them be heard. And I remember when, within the first couple of weeks of being on Twitter, I did a space that blew up to over 500 people in the active space listening to the live. And we had Richie on there, and we had Gender Critical, we had Rad Femmes, we had DSD, or Disorders of Sexual Development, which me and James represented that community, on top of me representing the trans community and him representing the gender critical community. James was born with IHH. It's also known as Kalman syndrome. It is this 40 character plus long acronym that I will just butcher trying to enunciate it. But idiotropic hypergonadism, hyper something hypergonadism. And basically, GnRH or Lupron mimics that DSD condition. So we've known for decades what will happen if you interrupt the sexual development of children. They're called disorders of sexual development. I was born with one of them. I was born with 48XXXY chromosomes, and because of that, I had to go through tetralogy of Flout when I was 4. I was born with a hole in my heart. I have neurological divergence. I'm on the autistic spectrum. I'm dyslexic, and it has caused all sorts of different physical problems and health problems for me. And then you'll hear other people claim they're intersex, and they will fetishize the conditions. And it's like, what's so sexually appealing about medical problems,
Yeah.
about osteoporosis, about needing open heart as a child? What None of this makes sense. And because of my DSD, I believe it was the cause of me getting gender dysphoria. I mean, I was born with gynecomastia, but I developed gynecomastia in my teenage years. So moobs,
Yeah.
for people who don't know what that is. And so, like, this isn't surgery, this is development. And where you can take hormones, get breasts too. But that's because they're mimicking DSD conditions. I basically grew up with no body hair, and I had hair on my head, but no hair on my arms, no hair on my chest, legs, nothing. And you'll hear people talk about, well, I was born with both sets of sex organs. That doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. Any person who is based in reality in their transition can testify to the side effects of transition. So when you block testosterone, It'll shut down your male anatomy, which will cause testicular atrophy. Because anybody who's gone through testicular atrophy, whether it be pain meds and it blocking testosterone production, it'll shrink your testicles down. And that's where it comes into the play. Well, what happens when you shut it off? It's going to do it within a month or two, and it's going to atrophy your testicles completely. So, like, what's reversible about that? And then you hear people talking about reversibility and transition. And I know several detransitioners that argue that nothing about it is reversible. I remember having a conversation with Sarah Higdon and Scott Nugent, and my first attempt at a podcast. And I remember Scott talking to me about what am I supposed to do? Go around the rest of my life saying it's ma'am? And he brings a very valid point. And so, like, when it comes to detrans, I've been trying to get people and enlighten them on this reality. So take someone like Shapeshifter. So Shapeshifter went through a male to female transition, bears those surgical nullification scars from how he describes it. And then you turn around and you detransition and then shut down the other sexual functions you have to detransition back. Okay, that's when you'll have a human being literally sharing the male and female lived experience at that point in detransition through complete nullification. And that's where a lot of detransitioners aren't willing to surgically detransition, and people sit there and rail on them about it. I have literally watched dozens of people go after Shapeshifter and argue with them that they should medically detransition. And it's like, okay, well, I can understand getting the breast removed, especially when he is wanting to do that himself, but pushing him to like a phalloplasty and anything else is ridiculous. And he's never capable of going back. Heck, when he first started testosterone, his body rejected it and had an allergic reaction to it and had to go to the jail. So, like, there's certain nuances that nobody wants to acknowledge. Like we said before, the nuances in discussion are just completely lost. And people don't understand the seriousness of a lot of these things happening. And, you know, on top of all that happening, to have people actively fighting for pedophilia, because that's what's happening right now. People are fighting for the sexual citizenship of children. And we aren't going to allow that. I mean, what reasonable person would? I've never been capable of having children. I was never part of the gene pool. I never developed that function because of my DSD. Most people with DSDs cannot have children. And the more they get blurred in between, the less likelihood they can even conceive children. And it's not a matter of because I took testosterone or estrogen. DSDs do have that unfortunate reality. Not all DSD conditions prevent being able to have kids, but a good portion of them do.
Yeah.
So you take like Klinefelter syndrome, and a good portion of Klinefelter syndrome, you can't have kids, and most people don't find out till they try to have kids. So you'll end up having somebody at 25, 30 that finds out they have 47XXY Klinefelters, and then run into that problem. And, you know, only certain conditions people will know sooner, say like CAH, and you'll have ambiguous genitalia, but they could still tell the difference between an enlarged clitoris and a micropenis. There's a big difference between the two. So there's just so much information that we've been trying desperately to get out there for people to hear and listen, and try and restore some semblance of normality and raise them back into the conversation, because we can't have important discussions anymore because people just cave to venom and vitriol every time now. And you're not allowed to have a different opinion than I am. You have to conform to the hive mind. You must join the grand balloon. And it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and if you question the narrative, then all of a sudden you're the enemy.
Right. And then they come after you.
So for anyone, you know, watching this that doesn't know, if you've been living under a rock, you'll see videos, say on like libs of TikTok, showing some of the insanity of what one side says is everybody. And so your organization exists to say, hey, whoa, this isn't everybody. This is a select group of people who have kind of hijacked our lived experience, like what we're going through, and are using it for, the social advancement of pedophilia. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say a good portion of it's all rooted in gender ideology. So gender ideology boils down to that point where it's about the sexual citizenship of children as one of the founding doctrines in their own philosophy. And the way they look at it is childhood innocence is a myth, and that they're empowering children with the right to say no and sexual citizenship. But what they're also doing is empowering them with the right to say yes to having sex.
Yeah.
And they think that because of the oppression of 1,000 years of sexualization, where homosexuality just got somewhat normalized, that they need to liberate the other sexualities, and that includes zoophilia and pedophilia. And that's what they mean. When you hear them saying that it is because of sexual repression, it's not because they think you're not getting laid enough. It's because you're not allowing the other sexualities in their mind to exist publicly in the space where they're been advocating for decades, for a long time about this too. I mean, look at NAMBLA.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, National Man Boy Love Association. And then let's go back 10 years where Dog and Dragon Kin were first making their emergence into the mainstream world. And you ended up having virtuous pedophile movement come forward. Now you have the MAPS movement, minor attracted people coming forward, and their new offspring of no MAPS, non-offending minor attracted people.
Wow, they love their acronyms.
Oh, I know. It's all about rebranding to promote the same ideology that's existed forever. And it's like, okay, let's be real here. So if we go back to it, I could have swore it wasn't 1,000 years where they were oppressing child exploitation and sexualization of children, because I could have swore they were marrying off 14-year-olds not too long ago. And that you had kings and monarchs and everyone sitting there marrying little children. And it's been throughout history, we've seen it. So pretending like for 1,000 years that's been oppressed is nonsensical, for one. Two, it is disgusting and messed up on all comprehensions to do that to a child. And we just want children to be left alone to grow up and be a kid, not push gender ideology, not push sexuality on them. And how many of us sat there getting mad 15 years ago about the amount of sexuality in Disney films?
Yeah.
And they like to bring that up. It's like, I'm not happy about those either. I mean, what kind of message does it send to a little girl growing up where you have Sleeping Beauty, for instance? This girl is sleeping out in the middle of nowhere, and a guy just walks up and decides to kiss her on the lips. And the encouragement teaching little boys to do that to little girls, and little girls to just sit there and wait upon a guy to come up and kiss you kind of mentality.
Yeah.
It doesn't give the right message in the situation for little girls and little boys growing up. I mean, our history is full of that kind of stories. And I always enjoyed the empowerment stories for women. And girls didn't have much of that. You had like Mulan, say, when I was a kid growing up, and then you have Pocahontas. But let's take a closer look at those and see what kind of real role models those are.
Yeah.
And the factual basis of information that go through it is just non-existent. And it's messed up. And I just want to see us go ahead.
So why, in your opinion, why do you think that your community has been targeted? Is there like any historical links, or is there like exactly why have, for lack of a better term, these pedophiles been able to like co-opt your community, as if that's like the easiest for them to be able to push their message?
So this would just be my opinion on the matter, since I can't throw up a bunch of proof for it. I believe that they're co-opting us and using us because they know that we're a rights movement for sexuality. So with us being a rights movement for sexuality and them being predators, of course they're going to co-opt whatever they want to get what they want. And they're going to push us on like that. So I remember seeing when they first came out, the virtuous pedophile movement, how they were demanding the right to, say, go to your kid's birthday party at a park while you're barbecuing food, watching your kids run around, play games, throw water balloons, and demand the right to sit there and stare at your children and have an erection in a public park. Because as long as they're not acting on it, it's okay. Well, no, it's not. Like, we're not going to normalize pedophilia in modern society. We're not going to allow it. I'm going to fight to the death on not allowing pedophilia to be normalized in our space. I don't care. And I don't advocate for violence, but I will commit myself to the cause to fight against them at every functional level when it comes down to this. I've helped raise kids. Yeah. I've never been able to be a parent, to my great dismay, and I would have loved to have been a mom. I would have loved to have the experience of raising a child with my DNA, but I never had that experience. I got the experience of helping raise my nephews from the middle of a divorce to 6 years later, as them growing up to even this current moment. And I've invested a lot of my time and money and trying to help them become functional parts of society. So like I can completely relate, because that was the only way I could get out that maternal instinct that I have. And all of us have maternal and paternal instincts naturally hardwired into us, which that's where I believe they're fighting against that. And they're expecting us to just sit back and do nothing. But they believe they're the most oppressed class on the planet. And then they're trying to liberate them for that. And that's such a disturbing factor, that we have so many people in today's day and age that are showing their true colors on that note. And I honestly don't believe this is new. This has been going on for decades. Because let's be real, where did all the kids go on the milk cartons we grew up seeing that were kidnapped and disappeared? And then we found out about Epstein's sex ring. Yeah. Well, then you find out about Epstein's sex ring growing up. And then you start wondering about the application of that with those disappearing kids in such large numbers. And that's where we're at, this current problem right now, where they can't hide no more. They didn't have Amber Alerts 20, 30 years ago. And growing up with Amber Alerts now, and the internet the way it is, and how mainstream media can't hide the truth anymore. Even with their censorship, they're having a hard time keeping the truth secret. And now they're having to force it out to be normalized because they can't hide anymore. And they're getting called out more. And I remember over a year ago, let's say about almost 2 years at this point, I remember having somebody that knew me from school. I did not remember them, but they went to school with me. Other people I went to school with remember them. But they reached out to me when they found out I transitioned. And then I found out they just got released from prison. And I tried not to judge them for it, to think about that. I try not to be that kind of person. And he just kept getting sexual and trying to take it a direction. And I was like, I apologize. I'm not here to fulfill your niche because you just got out of prison. I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. And then when he started sensing I was rejecting him, he turned around and oh, I'm trans. And then started asking me questions about transitioning, to have me describe myself in a more private, nuanced conversation after just hitting on me and flirting with me.
So and trying to get what he wanted in a very
so I was thinking AGP. Way. So my first thought was AGP. Just to be honest, I don't judge all AGPs. Not all AGPs are bad. I know plenty of autogynephiles that are good, decent people that don't do that. But when paired with cluster Bs, it could be a little cringy at times and uncomfortable for me. Well, anyways, with this personality, Um, he started showing signs of autogynephilia, but I still kind of was giving him answers to his questions. And it's like, okay, well, you know what? Since you're asking me such deep personal questions, why were you in prison? And then he told me something that came off as a flat out lie. And I was like, if this is what I feel is your lie, what did you really do? So what he told me was he was on LimeWire, and then he downloaded a movie that happened to be child porn, and then he was arrested by the FBI. And then I called in a few favors. I talked to a few friends that were paralegals, and then I had them pull his FBI record. So he actually owned and sold child porn down to 3 years old on LimeWire. And he was making money off of it. And it's all on the FBI case file. He was busted in a sting operation. It wasn't just a random chance, it was a full on sting. And then before I got that information, because time and waiting for that, once I asked at that point, he started basically focusing on my state and with sealing records when you do your name and sex change. And then that terrified every core of my being, because you have this registered pedophile that is trying to take advantage of the laws on sealing your name and records. So there's no record of you changing your name and sex. And he was wanting to exploit that as a sex offender to hide that he is a sex offender. And that terrified me. So he was the only person I've ever doxed in my life. So I doxed him across the internet.
Yeah.
And wanted people to know this is a monster. I posted my conversation with him and made sure people knew this is the bad person and what they are and what they're about and why they were in jail for 10 years. And I don't regret doxing that person. I will take the punishment for admitting that I did that to somebody. I don't regret anything in this case. I don't regret in this case. Pedophiles should be called out when they're found. And
I completely agree.
I've run into other personalities, like with Lily Connors. I've ran into Lily Connors throughout the years with the circles I've been in. And it has just irked me on so many levels, because most of the Lily Connors disgust me on such a different level than just a normal pedophile. Because they're pedophiles that know the law so well and terms of services so well, they know how to break them without going over the line and getting banned all out. And it's scary. And they're relying upon big
explain the difference real quick for people who might not know.
So Lily Connors are the type of individuals that draw, obsessed, and specifically fap it to drawings of children in sexual provocative situations. And I don't recommend looking up Lily Con. I don't.
Yeah.
You are not going to like what you find. But they'll have it in their profile that they are a Lily Con, or they go to Lily Con. And a good portion of them are out in the open pedophiles. The person I sent you the screenshots of, they're an out in the open pedophile. I even asked them, so you're an out in the open pedophile? Yes.
Yeah.
Without any other context to it, just flat out yes. And then you scroll through their timeline.
That was, like I was telling you, just absolutely mind-blowing. That not only does their mind function that way, but they are so open. It was truly disturbing.
It is. And the reason why is because they're trying to socially engineer us through environmental conditioning, that we are powerless to stop them, that they are protected, and we can't do anything except live in our disgust and hate of them. And so knowing we can't stop them.
They're trying to include themselves under a protected class.
Yes. And they're trying to get that established and normalized in mainstream that way. It's all about manipulation.
What is the pushback like? Because I assume there's a faction within the trans community, possibly even just like in the gay and lesbian community, that give you guys some real serious pushback for trying to address any of this.
Yeah, so like with the no maps movement, they'll end up making the arguments that so you just want them to go back into hiding so we don't know they exist. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, so we're not normalizing them. They need help. They need to be incarcerated. I'm sorry, they cannot be wandering around freely. I'm sorry. Like, I'm not about unprovoked incarceration, but when you're literally obsessed, and it's been proven that they can't be cured. There's no
Yeah.
cure to pedophilia. And saying that we have to normalize them like we do homosexuality and transsexuality, no. I'm sorry, it's not even comparable. And they specifically get off on appropriating children that aren't theirs and then sexually assaulting them to get off on them. Like, everything about it's so predatory. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that they're going to take hostages to get access to people's children whenever they can. And they sit there and fight for it. They literally see them as the most oppressed people on the planet because people just want to kill them. And, parents fighting, you're fighting against parents' maternal and paternal instinct. You don't get between a parent and their child. I am
Yeah.
sorry. No. And thinking you have the right to go to that parent and be like, you have no right to stop me from your child. No. Oh my God. Like, I can't believe we have to have these arguments. Like, I'm all
Yeah.
about conversation and freedom of speech. My God. Like, within reason. Everything is within reason. I'm not going to support free speech that condemns someone to death and sits there and tells people how they should be murdered. I'm not going to say that that's protected speech. I mean, there are certain things. Somebody threatening harm on your children and family, that's not protected speech. Like, there's
Yeah.
reason. There's reasonable levels to things. You can't just cross over. Like, nothing to the point of fanaticism is ever good.
Well, and there. This is like I was telling you earlier. I am a free speech absolutist, um, and although I do believe that people can say anything outside of directly calling for direct, intimate violence, which is already illegal. That is not protected speech.
Right.
Um, there are tons of terrible things that people can say, but I also believe that you're not free from the response that you get from the general public, and I believe shame is a big part of this. And when you have certain ideas and certain beliefs, you need to be publicly shamed. You need to be publicly ostracized. That's the other side of free speech.
Right. And your speech in complement to that is also covered free speech. I mean, like I said, even with you being all about free speech, if you had a 50-year-old man walk into a preschool and then start screaming how they wanted to sexually exploit a child, I'm sure your limits on free speech are going to hit a pretty solid brick wall there.
Well, he
And
has every right to say it, but he's also going to have to deal with the consequences of saying it. So, there's that's the thing about life is you can do lots of things, but there's going to be consequences. So, that's that's kind of interesting. I was curious because I also agree that it's been proven there's no cure, there's no amount of drugs, no amount of counseling um, to cure pedophilia. What, in your opinion, is like a reasonable uh, solution with these people?
well, I would be about having them incarcerated and then obviously getting mental and physical therapy to try and better understand how we can treat this problem. I mean, what's even more disturbing is Lupron is also the same drug they give child molesters to chemically castrate them. So
Yeah.
going in circles on that one where it ends up falling into that same category and ridiculousness that the extremes. I don't think chemical castrating is the solution and doing that to them. I don't believe just flat out murdering them is the solution. I am absolutely disgusted by them, and I personally wouldn't be able to sit there and in a room with them and having conversations for extended periods of time. I couldn't do it. I do not have that level of patience and personality to get to do that. But I think having them taken out of bondage society, put somewhere, and then have these conversations and trying to figure out a way to deal and cure with it. I mean, we've seen plenty of attempts before, from physical castration to chemical castration of pedophiles to try and stem their urges and cravings. But so far, it's proved useless to stop them, and the repeat offenders will just keep repeating to offend, and they'll never stop.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because of the way things are, they've gotten really good with technology, and unfortunately, they're really like, that's the part that bothers me, is how technology has protected them so much, and how they've relied upon that same technology for anonymity and to do what they're doing. Like that Lily Connor, I'm proof positive if we pull up their IP address, it's going to be masked or spoofed, and it's not going to be their actual IP address. And that they know the system so well to exploit it, like we said before with TOS and laws. And it
Yeah,
just
they get
bothers,
right to the edge.
right? And they do it just to provoke us. And where at first it was like, this person's way too on the nose, but I don't see any real viable solution to treat and deal with it at the current time, especially when it comes to mental health and the DSM. After everything that's happened, I have a hard time believing the DSM is that useful anymore in the modern era. And it's just full of so much nonsense. And you have the comorbidities that match everything. Like, I've seen people sit there that didn't have these conditions go through the DSM and then thought they had 5 or 7 of those conditions because the comorbidities matching up, and they couldn't distinguish between them all. And there's no way the therapist can either. And anyways, there's not enough therapists on the planet to cover the need of the mental health that we're not getting. And there's just so many nuances, again, to
Yeah.
this whole conversation that have to be addressed. And figuring out the DSM-5 and getting that fixed. Because look at gender dysphoria. It started as gender identity disorder, as mental illness, and then it changed into a medical space because most people don't add this part in. It was deemed as a medical space over mental illness because you don't treat a condition with surgery to cure it like that.
Yeah.
You treat it with a drug. And that's the FDA's filing on that matter, not mine personally. But so they said it's a medicalized space. Now gender dysphoria is removed from the prerequisite completely. Now it's an incongruence. And they've muddled together transvestitism and transsexualism and everything else in between. And then people are so worried about, like, the trans movement right now. Well, let me terrify you all to another level with non-binary affirming care. So non-binary affirming care is literally nullification surgeries. So if you look at nullification surgeries, you'll see that they're penectomies or orchiectomies. So a penectomy is to remove your penis without any further feminization. An orchiectomy is to remove your testicles and leave the penis. So you literally turn yourself into a eunuch. And they're pushing for that. And you'll hear, like, couples. Couples end up going through what I believe was a nullial surgery and had a double mastectomy to become more non-binary affirming. And oh my God, like, non-binary affirming care is everything we as transsexuals fought against, and everything the DSD community has fought against. So one of those nullification surgeries is a phallus-saving vaginoplasty. So you look like you have both sex organs, and it claims that you'll have a fully functional vagina. though it's just not as fully functional. And I question what the surgeon, doctor, and clinic think functionality is in regards to a vagina, first and foremost, with that statement. But the misinformation it gives to patients and misleads them in if they don't have a firm understanding of their biological function and health and how the surgery works, they'll be misled into that situation. And as somebody who's a transsexual, as much as people think I'd be all over a vaginal saving vaginoplasty, especially somebody in the DSD community, when I have gender dysphoria, the whole point is not having a penis. So keeping the penis for sexual function, like, it defeats the whole purpose to that procedure. And that's where it comes to, it makes no sense on so many levels. And it's so dangerous and messed up. And then it representing everything we've fought so hard against for decades on these procedures and surgeries. And then we have people that are getting negative outcomes and doctors aren't being held responsible. And we have to sign all of our rights away on that note. And it's just this crazy, vicious cycle. And I know I kind of got off trail with what you originally pointed out.
One thing I did kind of want to transition to, no pun intended, was the big issue right now. So a core tenet of, all of my beliefs, my personal, political, social, is the idea of consent. And
What is that?
Consent.
I'm joking.
Yeah. So obviously I come from a position that children cannot consent.
100%.
And once again, it's like, I can't believe we're having these conversations. I thought that was already established, like that was done, that was not a conversation we needed to have. So the big issue seems to be now children transitioning, and that seems to also be, a big issue with the people fighting back against this, which are kind of trying to group everyone together that, obviously everyone in the trans community is okay with children transitioning. So I'm not really sure exactly
incorrect.
what I'm trying to ask here, but exactly.
I'm 100% against children transitioning. 100% against it.
Yeah.
Especially if we're talking about medical or surgical, 100% against it. They need to wait to 18.
Yeah.
And when it comes to, and I 100% agree with you. Okay, when it comes to trans kid, it boils down to two issues. What is appropriate for a child and age of consent. And whether it be the parent consenting for the child's behalf at such a young age. And you cannot convince me there aren't parents that are sacrificing their children's health and functionality for attention. And there is a portion of the population that treat trans kids as the new Gucci handbag or tattoo or piercing to show their woke virtual signaling. I'm sorry, you can't have a 2-year-old that claims they're trans. I'm sorry, the kid wouldn't even understand the fundamental concept. I know adults that don't understand how to define sex. And that's where we're at. And we're saying a 2-year-old. UCSF in San Francisco, California sees patients as young as 2 at their gender affirming clinic. Christina Button brought it to my attention. I've been calling them out ever since. Since I've been calling them out publicly, they revised their website. You can go back to the Wayback Machine. I saved it in July and saved a waypoint where they didn't have this added to their SOC, standards of care. And then in their own SOC, they left it that they accept new patients 13 to 17, or 3 to 17. And then say underneath it that they only have social and emotional development for kids till they reach an appropriate age. Don't say what that appropriate age is. And they sit there and I have to ask them, why does a parent or the child need a gender affirming clinic to change their kids' pronouns and clothing? Oh, well, they need therapy, emotional development. What 2-year-old needs therapy? What trauma have they endured that's so bad that they need a therapist and to go to a gender affirming clinic for? I have a hard time believing anything they're saying on any level with that. I even had one of their patients come at me trying to say, because DSD conditions, trying to play that heartstring with me. And I'm like, at 2 and 3, they would need hormones. That's not till puberty. That's the way it works. And most people don't know they have those DSD conditions till then. Like, nothing you're saying makes any sense. Make it make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so that this is actually when I had learned that Trans Against Groomers was back on Twitter. For several days in a row, there was um, a massive split conversation within the libertarian community. Well, I wouldn't say it was it definitely wasn't an even split. Um, the majority of libertarians were on the position that children cannot consent. Period. That's what makes them partially children, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of or a few factions within the libertarian community that says or equating not giving gender affirming care is equivalent to child abuse, and it caused a lot of rifts. Then that's actually where you and I started talking within the comments and everything. Um, and this is something that a majority of the libertarians have been trying to push back against, the people who say, you know, it's none of your business what a parent decides to do with their child. Um, I mean that's a really vague statement, but that doesn't change the fact that children cannot consent and that this is not
100%.
okay to promote.
Oh, 100%. Okay, so like I said, I'm 100% against children transitioning. They can wait till 18. I'm not even, I'm still on the fence about even allowing them to socially transition. So, like, one thing people aren't going to understand is the difference between socially transitioning and gender nonconformity. So, social transition would be changing your pronouns and name and identifying that way versus you're just putting on clothing. And to be honest, I don't think clothing has much to play into the gender dysphoria. They're tools we'll use to help with our dysphoria. Sure. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when it comes for me, is how my clothing hangs off me and dealing with and mitigating my gender dysphoria. And that's where it comes down. Is if it helps mitigate gender dysphoria, yes. Nothing's going to cure it, but it can help lessen. So it's not so overwhelming and swallowing you whole in that sense when it was anxiety and depression and ideation. And putting kids in that space. So I agree with the desistance model. So at 16, 80% of people who experience gender dysphoria desist. Well, beyond that, there's a subset, a small subset of people that don't desist and that it stays with them forever. And that's where I think it's important to draw that line at 18, is because as somebody who unfortunately suffers from gender dysphoria, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. Why the hell would I wish it on a kid? And when there's an 80% chance they'll desist and never have to go through this experience, never have to deal with the anxiety, the depression, the suicide ideation, the social rejection, everything. I want them to live their best life. And a good portion of these kids that are being pushed in this space are just questioning. They may not even potentially be gay or lesbian. They could just be questioning, or unfortunately played with the wrong toy, or you were a little boy that liked pink a little too much, or you were a little girl that liked playing sports a little too much. And the gross overcorrection that is happening with kids. And when it comes to let kids be kids, that's another part of this really disturbing, insidious plot happening right now. So, like, one of their arguments that they'll bring up is that we treat kids like property.
Mm-hmm.
And they have no agency of their own, which is why they're fighting to give them agency to make the choice.
Yeah.
And we say they can't consent to that choice. And that's where they say that's the oppression. And that's where it comes in is like we have the struggle right now between parents and the government on what's best for their own children. And it's playing off of that and taking away parents' rights to their own prodigy and having even a say in their own education and the effect that's having on them mentally. And like I said, to me, the important part also is having these discussions. As shitty as some of them can be, and as much as I can't believe we're having certain ones, it's about having the discussions to where we can actually have the discourse to try and come up with a reasonable solution to fix the problem. And that's what's important to me, is trying to restore that semblance of normality. Let kids be kids, let them grow up and do their thing. If a girl wants to play basketball, let her play basketball. If a boy wants to play with a Barbie, let him play with the Barbie. It doesn't mean anything at this point. As somebody who's a homosexual, transsexual, will self-identify irregardless of you supporting us. So to sit there and push them into that space, just be accepting. That's it. You can just accept them as a kid being a kid instead of pushing a stereotype on them. At least back in my day, we just got beat if we played with the wrong toys. We didn't opt them out of the gene pool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard a lot of discussion around this being like the death of the tomboy.
Yeah,
I mean,
it
is. There's a lot of social issues with bringing children into this, and I think it also seems to be harming people who are actually suffering, such as yourself, being able to get appropriate care. Would I be wrong in saying that?
No, you're not wrong. I mean, even today, I had 3 people telling me how gender dysphoria is even real. It doesn't even exist. It's make believe because of the trans rights activists. Like the trans rights activists prove to them that gender dysphoria doesn't exist and isn't real. And that's where it comes into that. Okay, so like with DSD conditions, that's another harm you don't hear people talking about. So Alex, she's a good friend of mine. She's part of the DSD community and a detransitioner. So she was forced to transition against her will because of her DSD condition by her parents at a young age. So it brings back into that argument about kids and the right to consent and the parents' right to consent on behalf of the kids for this notion. Where I could say in some cases having the government be able to come in and say something, well, that's not necessarily going to work. So just making sure that's not even available as an option for kids to surgically and medically transition in the first place to avoid that from happening versus having the government regulate what parents can and cannot do with their kids. If they go after the medical professionals performing these procedures and they'll say they go black market and go underground, we can't stop the black market underground. That's just the reality of it. But that doesn't mean we have to go along with it. Okay, murder is illegal. That doesn't mean we have to support murderers in murder in general to make no nuance, all black and white. It's either all good or it's not good. And yeah, back in full circle again on every part of these conversations with this ideology. But I'm really worried about the parents. And that's one reason why, like, I'm recently going to be going to another school board meeting and speaking on behalf because a parent asked me to come and speak at their school board. I'm not going to say what school board it is. Yeah. I'm not trying to turn it into a political protest. I'm not trying to get a bunch of attention to the issue. I'm trying to go there and speak on behalf of the parents as they requested. And sure, we can get the attention later. I'm not wanting the threats and the harm and then a mob of people bringing guns and body armor to a school.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to say, hey, reading this book to a child's inappropriate and this is pornographic material you're putting in school libraries. Just to say that I don't want to risk something like that happening. And I'm worried about that because like I can't even go and speak out about an issue without that threat of violence coming after me. And I'm worried about me just going and speaking at a school, they'll bring violence to the schools.
Yeah.
And how that puts me in such a messed up space because I'm trying to do what's right for the parent, then ask me to be there speaking on their behalf. And then if I publicly state I'm going to be doing this, they'll come after the parent, they'll come after the schools, they'll go after the parent's kid in the school. And it's so sick and messed up. Like to the point where I feel shamed into silence, or else these situations happen. And they blame me for it. Like how much blame we've gotten for Club Q, the gay club that had the shooting
Yeah.
in it. How much blame I even got because of my protest at a satanic goth gay bar with an 11-year-old performer that was LARPing as a story hour, but having an 11-year-old performer. And whose drag mom has 12 counts of sexual abuse and exploitation. That is promoting an 11-year-old kid to be in the satanic goth gay bar performing in a provocative way. And I remember having somebody come up to me and ask me, it's like, I watched her performance and it was pretty benign. And then I posted pictures from before and previous ones that weren't under the microscope, that didn't have police officers in the club.
Yeah.
And showed them how provocative it was to let them know, okay, but what about this? How about coming here when we're not protesting them and they have thousands of people watching them? Like, see how she performs then. Tell me how comfortable you are about them making it rain $1 bills on an 11-year-old girl.
Or stand in front of a sign that says it ain't gonna suck itself.
Mm-hmm. And they said I called for violence on them. It's like I announced I was going out there with a sign to do my best Vanna White impersonation. And it's so inflammatory on my sign. Dragging your kids to a bar has never made anyone a good parent.
Yeah.
That was the controversial statement I had to say publicly.
Wow.
And that was warrant and akin to violence for stating the obvious. It's just so messed up of a system that we got going on right now, like I said. And I'm wanting to empower parents. I got into this to empower parents and women and have their voices restored again. And like with trans women and women's sports, I don't believe as trans women we should be validating ourselves as women at the cost of women, especially at the cost of suffrage, taking away their vote and their voice in the matter. Yeah. And I don't see that doing us any good on trying to fix this problem, especially restore our faith with women. Because of them, they've irrevocably damaged our relationship with biological women. Where most of them would have been accepting of us, except for a small proportion of them, they've destroyed that. And don't get me wrong, the extremes of feminism didn't help none either.
No.
Let's put blame where it lies. Right. And so two extremes don't actually come up with a decent solution. So they're both at fault for what's happening right now. And one wouldn't exist without the other. That's just the way that happens in the extreme circles, where we just need nuance again. We need the gray area so we can meet in the middle. But we won't allow anyone to have that.
I'm definitely appreciative of yourself, the people that you work with, your organization, because I truly believe that there is a overreaction in many instances, or at least maybe not an overreaction, but a misdirected reaction to where it is not obviously your entire community that is for this. There are bad faith actors who maybe they deserve, the reaction that's coming, but it's once again that nuance. There's more than just this group. Right. And so, that's one reason I was really glad that you decided to do this, and I definitely thank you for doing this. because it's important for me. I enjoy radical politics. I enjoy, the radical side of things, but there is a line that can be crossed, and I think there's a line being crossed that is partially manufactured. It seems as though right wing commentators will not include this nuance. Left wing commentators are, and of course I'm talking, the bigger podcast,
Right.
The Young Turks and everything, and any pushback against this at all is, just transphobic, and you want people to die and all these like terrible things, and then the right is saying all these things like all trans people are coming after your kids, and that's unhealthy. That is completely
Oh,
unhealthy on both
100%.
sides.
Where there are, I will admit, there are trans people that do believe that and are actually coming for your kids. Like, you have Ellie, who has doctors giving her prescriptions to send to children. And it's not a matter of checking to see if they're trans. They're not doing any medical check. They're just sending, if you message her, she will send you pills, testosterone, just whatever you want. And that's where it comes down to that. It's like, that's illegal on its own. I could have swore testosterone was a Schedule 3 drug, and that it had to be a prescription because of how powerful of a drug it is. And the fact that she's just sending them willy-nilly to any kid that sends it to it, that's abuse. And
That is so scary.
A gross overcorrection. Once again,
Yeah.
like I say, every time we end up having some nuance restored, we have gross overcorrection. And we're going to see more and more of this radicalism happening on that level too. Sorry, I have to take the pup out potty. I'm going to keep you with me. I'm just going to be migrating.
No worries.
Yeah, the pup's whining at me. He needs to be emptied.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
concerning.
can you
to
let
me.
him out?
Yeah.
I'm in a podcast.
I was going to bring the printer in, but
That's not a printer. That's a computer.
All right, everyone watching, make sure and hit the like, subscribe, and share button. These are the conversations that need to get out to people, and these are incredibly important conversations that will help move the needle in the correct direction.
Hoping. Fingers
Yes.
crossed on that one. Let me tell you, because I'd like to see us be able to function as a society and be happy. And like I say, if they never would have gone after people's kids, this would be a completely different time and discussion.
Yeah.
But we can't stop pedophiles from being predators, unfortunately. And predators will prey upon people, and that's what they do. And that's where we're at. So yeah. I want, like, that's another thing, like, I thought was so important to our movement. What was the parents that have been on the fence, but all their instincts are firing, telling them this is wrong. And then being able to go to those parents and be like, you're 100% correct. Everything about this is wrong. Your fears are valid. Keep fighting and keep speaking out against it. Like, just that is so important to a lot of people and a lot of parents from my experience. I've had lots of parents come to me and tell me thank you for that. And then women too. And seeing them round their voices in trans women's sports, and then me seeing the things they can't get away with without being called a phobe and canceled for the very thought.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no. And like, I remember parents saying, I can't get away with saying what you say. And I'm like, I don't get away with it. What are you talking about? I'm full on canceled.
Yeah, I've got a target on my back.
A while ago. I'm saying these things because they can't double cancel me. They've canceled me as far as they can.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I cover my face and why I hide, and I don't use my name I go by in real life. It's because of that reason. And it's never ending. I've still had people find me in real life, and it's terrifying. Because it's not like I have a fan that comes out and be like, oh my God, Freya. No, it's all been hate. I've yet to have I take that back. I have had a couple positive moments from parents that I went and spoke out on their behalf for. I had a positive impact there. Like at the protest, I had people screaming anti-gay slurs behind me, and then I had people in front of me condemning me for standing against them, and then threatening me with violence. And yeah, the transphobes won't save you, Freya. Better be ready. We're coming.
It's
as they're all
scary
standing with
the
the guns.
lengths that people will go to push this, which is, you know, one consideration I've taken into account, even just talking about this subject.
Mhm.
It seems that as it gets more extreme, it gets more and more dangerous, to even just talk about the subject at all.
Right. Especially if you're cis scum, as people like to say.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
how?
I'm a straight white male, you know, and
Oh, you're not allowed to have an opinion, hun.
no, I'm public enemy number one most of the time. So
Well, and how? Okay, here's the thing. How do you feel about having? Not to come off offensive. How do you feel about having um, gingers used in studies? Well, trans and DSDs are as common as genders being born. What are you talking about?
no.
How do you feel about that one and always being used as the cited remark for so many things?
Oh boy, I mean it's
Inaccurate as hell, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, being, you know, that's like summed up into just like one little box, and then have that box being used to disparage your entire existence. Like, I mean, that's not a new thing. Humans have been doing that to each other for all of recorded history.
Oh, I
And
know. I mean, I could have sort
it's
of remember hearing South Park mainstreaming the idea of not having souls.
yeah, gingers not having souls, being moon people.
Hmm.
I mean,
I'm just saying it's comparable.
yeah, no, it is. And it's, in my opinion, it's so intellectually weak. It's like there are definite things to criticize people about, even like who they are, but that is just so intellectually weak. And I personally, you know, I revere intelligence, and so these weak arguments, for one, just makes me roll my eyes, but it makes me sick that it's like you can't even do better than that. Like, you've just got to come after my gender or my skin color, which is like as important as the color of my hair, you know? It's like,
Right.
if you're going to insult me, at least do so intelligently.
Well, no, they just can't disparage against a class of people because why not? I mean, God, it's not even a true argument. So, like the statement of people born with DSD conditions is as many as people born as gender, completely false. So many more people are born ginger than with DSD conditions. DSDs don't represent 1.7% of the population.
Yeah.
That's based on Ann Fastow Sterling and her assessment, which was flawed from the outset. You're talking about, with certain conditions, 1 in 68,000. And you're talking about 40 plus subset conditions to make DSDs. So DSDs is an umbrella term that adds together 40 different conditions. If you took each individual condition, you're talking 1 in 68,000, 1 in 157,000, and so on and so forth to rarity. And that's not going to equal out to that same amount of number. Even if you group them all together, it equals out to 0.05 to 0.02% of the population is born with the DSD condition. And even then, depending upon their condition, it has even more rarity attached to it. You're more likely to be born 47XY Klinefelters as a male than you are to be born with CAH as a male. And CAH is
Hell,
one of the two conditions that.
You're more likely to be born with autism. You know.
Well, yeah, you unfortunately,
Yeah.
can't really argue
So,
much about that for being on the autistic
yeah,
spectrum
that's
myself.
wild, those numbers though.
Right. And that's where it comes into the conflation. And it depends upon which area you're considering. So the is that the statistic for United States or is that statistic for Europe on birth rates? Because they're different, depending
Yeah.
upon where you're talking about. And that's where I'm saying it's like it makes no sense that the information is getting conflated and people are just gobbling it up because they don't know anything different. Like I said, so what is how many sexes are there in your mind? And what is the defining characteristic between the two sexes?
I mean the two. I mean the characteristics between the two sexes. Oh boy, I mean, of course there's physical, whereas and there's different genitalia, different abilities physically.
But you have
However,
men that can be born with boobs
mhm,
just as much as a woman's born with boobs.
yeah,
So what's
and
the difference between secondary characteristics?
secondary characteristics I think play less of a role as versus being able to birth a child naturally,
Correct.
having
And
ovaries.
that's where it comes down to is gametes or
Yeah.
gametes, depending upon how you want to enunciate. So what I've been saying is sex is based on gametes and gamete pathways. So what is a gamete? You know?
No.
Okay, so a gamete is a sperm or an egg. So you
Mhm.
have static large gametes, which are eggs, and then you have moving small gametes, which are sperm.
Mhm.
That's one of the reasons why I like to tell TRAs. It's like you wouldn't know what a gamete is if it was bukakied on your face.
That's a good
So,
one.
what's in between a sperm and an egg? If there's an intersex, which I hate that misnomer, but what's in between a sperm and an egg? Because
I'm
I
not
thought a speg was just a fertilized egg.
okay. So I'm not sure what would it be in between.
Nothing. So, like what
Okay.
the joke has always been is there's a speg in between a sperm and an egg,
Yeah.
but a speg is just a fertilized egg. That's all it
Yeah.
is. And unless we're talking about deformity levels, so you have a deformity chart going off like the difference between Cro-Magnon man and Homo sapien. So, I mean, like, what are we really talking about here?
Yeah.
There's no spectrum. So, when the spectrum argument started failing because of people at DSDs coming forward and speaking out, they went to the bimodal spectrum argument. So now it's a bimodal system. You can't have a bimodal system without a third subset in the category
Hmm.
because you have to have an in between, a perfectly in between, and that doesn't exist in human nature. Now, if
Which
you're talking
us
about
also kind of
starfish,
which also kind of disproves the non-binary, as if you were non-binary, then you're separate, which creates a binary.
so can you define non binary or defend non binary without using trans or DSD conditions?
No.
Exactly.
I have yet to hear any argument that could.
Okay, the only argument I have heard is detransitioners.
Okay. I can
Only
see that
argument
being
I've heard is
valid.
detransitioners because of surgical and user intervention has changed to where they could, if they wanted to quantify as a non binary, because they've been removed from that system. And people have gone through nullification surgery, technically could fall into that realm because they nullified themselves. They're
Yeah.
still biologically male or female, just like a DSD condition. And that's where it comes in as transition is like mirroring DSD conditions artificially.
Okay.
And that's where we come into this. And where I don't want people to think DSDs are trans, they are completely different. You are born with the DSD condition. You don't get a say in the matter. It happens at
No.
conception. It happens when your parents first have sex and the XX and XY chromosomes first meet to pair to form a child. So that's where it comes into that matter. And you have transition, which try and use DSD conditions to help advise them to do the transition. So saying they're the same is just disingenuous and messed up to people born with DSDs, because we don't get a say in this. We're born here. We don't, like, I grew up looking extremely feminine body wise, and I couldn't do anything about that. That wasn't me making a choice. I had to go on HRT no matter what I decided. And that's just the reality of the situation. Somebody with Kalman syndrome has to go on testosterone. Somebody with Klinefelter's has to go on testosterone. Their body doesn't produce enough of it to function.
Which these would be appropriate medical cases,
right,
for a doctor to step in medically.
Right. And that's why I don't believe banning these medications is a solution either, because people born with DSD conditions. And like when Trans Against Groomers and Gays Against Groomers, I started asking questions like, what about the kids already stuck here? What about the kids that are already here? Most of our messages are aimed before they transition. What about the ones that are already here? Yeah. And we agree with like grandfathering, because it would not benefit them whatsoever to just cut them off of their hormones. And that would just send them into chaos. And depending upon how long they've been on the hormones and blockers, they may not be able to stop and go back. Like we discussed before, once you cross this line and you're here, there is no reversibility. So like when you have a 16-year-old kid that had been in it for 3 years, and they've been on Lupron and testosterone or estrogen, and then they can't produce their own anymore. And they're still going to need HRT no matter what direction they go.
Yeah.
And so just cutting them off would just cause them needless harm. And I've had other trans rights activists come at me saying that I should be guilty of trans genocide for denying medical care and needs of children. And it's like, I'm not denying medical need. Like, they're going to be stuck here. That's the reality of it. And we have to deal with that repercussion. But that doesn't mean we need to add more.
Isn't that the largely the danger in this with children, though? Mm-hmm. We don't largely know the results of this. And also, I mean, for the medical field, this is great. This is lifetime customers.
Right. 1.3 to 1.6 million per child for life.
And that's, I was just reading, it's like a $1.9 billion industry right now, and it's expected to reach $5 billion by 2030, which is, right. I mean, where's
that's not even including non-binary affirming care, mind you. That's just transgender care. So imagine 2 of those.
Which seems
there are more non-binary than trans.
Whew. Wow. It just seems to be a violation of the Hippocratic Oath, as if we don't know.
The HIPAA? What's that?
Hippocratic Oath.
I don't understand.
To not cause harm to your patients.
So what does that mean? That doesn't make sense. I'm being facetious. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I got you. I don't know, where's the responsibility on behalf of the medical industry?
Oh, that's what I've been saying. Okay, how do you have informed consent when your own medical professions are hiding the truth of the repercussions?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't only till recent that detransitioners have been listened to in the first place. They've been mostly silenced and suppressed.
Which seems to be exactly who we should be listening to regarding 100%. All of this. They've been through it.
100%. So, like, before I got long into my transition, one of my mentors that I met, love her to death. I won't name her because she's in the closet and she doesn't want any part of this stuff. But anyways, her lived experience unfortunately mirrored Richie's 1-for-1. So couldn't feel anything below the waist, was incontinent. And when she tried to go back to testosterone, have you ever heard of phantom limb syndrome?
Yes.
Imagine having phantom limb syndrome after you had a vaginoplasty.
Mm,
So imagine you
that
have
sounds like hell.
phantom morning wood.
Wow. Yeah,
Imagine
it
going
sounds
through
like
that
hell.
unfortunate experience. So with her particular situation, she had a choice. Estradiol is a diuretic, also known as a water pill, which means it makes us go pee a lot. So when you're incontinent and it's going to make you pee more often, or you have phantom morning wood, choose your personal hell at
Yeah.
this current moment. And, that's where a lot of this comes into play is like she didn't know going into that was going to be the repercussions. And because she signed that paper and the doctor messed up, it doesn't matter how the doctor messed up or what he did to mess up. It's automatically he is without blame and it's all on the patient. And that's messed up.
Yeah.
The doctors are absolved of all guilt and any blame, and the quality of care comes into question on that level too. And so many people that didn't get the informed consent that they deserve to get. Shapeshifter swears up and down she didn't get informed consent. Chloe says how could she have informed consent when she was 13 when she made these choices? And her parents were told that their daughter would kill themselves if they didn't do this. How does the parent make an informed consent?
Yeah. Seems like manipulation from all ends.
Right. And okay, here's another thing. How do I trust? As a trans person who's been in this space, who's been harmed by it in more ways than one, how can we be reasonably expected to trust the doctors, the therapists, the pharmacists even anymore? How can we trust anyone in the medicalized space? Look at what COVID and what that did
Oh
with
boy, yeah.
vaccines mandates and pushing forced medical treatments, even into jobs on people. All of it around the same time, mind you.
Yeah.
And then SB 107 in California, trans sanctuary state, where they'll rip your kids from your arms, throw you in prison for neglect and abuse, and then transition your kid while taking these vulnerable, hurt kids that they say were so traumatized being in their family that they ripped them from their families, kicking and screaming, and then immediately throw them into foster care. It just has care written all over it, doesn't it? It has that
So
sentimental
caring.
ring to me.
Yeah.
And that's where it's at. And that's been the biggest problem here is we have all these cosmetic values that are care, that aren't care. It's just another shell game to manipulate and get control and power over people. Nobody's doing anything for the right things anymore. And that part disturbs me. Like nobody in gag or tag are making money off this. I'm doing this out of my own pocket. When I drop $100 in gas to go over somewhere to speak, I drop $100 out of my own pocket that I work for to speak. The only money I'm making to this current day, and I didn't plan to change it, was from my job that I work 40 to 60 hours a week on.
Yeah.
And we get called, grifters, that were paid grifters, that were hired to do all these detrimental things to the community. It's like, that's not true. We disagree with you. That's it. Like
Yeah.
anything to assassinate all of our characters for speaking out against it. And if that doesn't drive you to speak out more, I don't know what will.
So we'll start wrapping up here because I don't want to keep you too
Sure.
long. Where or what is some of the current goals of your organization? Like where do you see the organization a year from now?
A year from now, we're going to be in the heat of it for sure. It's going to be crazy. We have a lot of things in the works right now, from moving forward to speaking out at school councils, speaking at city council meetings, protests, and everything we have in the works currently, which I can't go into too much detail on, but we have a lot of events that we have planned, and we all are going to be moving forward, recruiting more people into our organization to have a wider reach. I would like to see a trans against groomers in every state, at least a handful of us. I know there aren't as many base transsexuals as there are gay people in the world, so we're not going to be able to compete with GAG's numbers. But having trans people that are protected and wanting to have their voice, that will be augmented by gays against groomers in this fight. I would like to see us get another state to ban medical transition for minors. We've gotten it done in 3 states so far. The lovely shapeshifter and Chloe Cole took part in Florida in getting medical transition in Florida banned for children. And we plan on speaking out more and going to medical boards and speaking out there too, to let them know about the harm done and give the D-trans community a chance to go to doctors and raise their voices. There's also several lawsuits pending currently against doctors and medical professionals that have done these surgeries to minors, like Chloe. And I can't wait to see what will happen with that as well. We have a lot of interesting things coming out in our investigations that will be coming to light within another month or 2, hopefully. And it's unfortunately going to be damning and damaging and horrific on every functional level. With what I've told you, Jacob, augment that by 10 on a terror factor. And that's what's going to be coming forward. And it's deep. It goes really, really deep. And it's really disturbing. And it's all about these multi-pronged attacks that they're currently doing. They don't do anything for one reason. It has multiple.
No.
And they're not transparent about it. That's what they do. So I would say definitely pay attention to gays against groomers and trans against groomers. If you can show us support, like I said, we don't have that much money. I am nowhere capable of affording private security to go with me to events to protect me. And even if I had private security, I'd be asking them to come unarmed, which I feel bad doing that because I've been going up against it myself. But none of us are trying to advocate for violence. We're trying to advocate for self-defense because we're getting death threats. We're getting attacked from all sides. And like I said, I did a protest. I didn't get hit with a pie in the face. I was threatened with guns and pepper spray and actual weapons. And the police did nothing. The police weren't there to protect us. They were hundreds and hundreds of feet away from us, watching it happen with no intention of getting in the middle of it. And the only time they got in the middle of it was when a homeless person got hurt. Only time they stepped in.
Step in until something's already happened.
Right. They're a reactionary force. I understand to that degree. But when you have people that are literally hurting people and you sit there and watch it happen and still choose to do nothing.
Yeah.
Like I advocate for police. I grew up in a ghetto. So I know how detrimental it is to not have police there to protect people. And what it feels like when you call the cops and they refuse to come. So I wouldn't advocate for shutting down police. Yeah. And I was growing up in a house with a single mom. So me at 10, my sister at a little older than me. I don't want to give too much information. But because the police wouldn't come out there, when a white supremacist gang was attacking the neighbor next door and our Filipino aunt was visiting with us with my cousins, we were stuck in our house hoping that it wouldn't happen. The police refused to show up when an actual white supremacist gang is trying to light their house on fire, destroying their cars out front, smashing it with bats and crowbars. Like legit hatred, legit real world racism. And they were doing it to 2 of my best friends because I was friends with their kids. They lived across the street from me. We played all the time, went to the same school. And, to see them being attacked like that for just being Mexican. That's it. Like, that's literally all they attacked them for was just being Hispanic. And seeing that happen, like, the horror I felt being in that position, even with being white. And having my Filipino cousin sitting right next to me crying.
It's definitely a different situation seeing it versus talking about it
Right.
zoomed out objectively. So it's
But
two
I see the
different
same hate
things.
happening right now
Yeah.
from multiple sites. And I'm specifically mainly trans rights, like the way they're going about it and the way they're hating on people. It's no better. It's just different.
Yeah. Just a different community of people. So we'll wrap up here.
Okay, Jacob.
Where can people find you? Where can people support you? And follow what's going on.
So I'm mostly active on Twitter. You can find me at Freya Lee 5806 on Twitter. I'll be under the same handle on Instagram as well, and I post there sometimes too. I do have a Facebook account under Freya Lee. But the best way to follow us is follow Gays Against Groomers and Trans Against Groomers. Their account exists on Twitter as well. It's spelled a bit differently just to meet the character limitations that come with Twitter. So it's TransAgnsTGRMRZ. The original one was RS, but that got banned by Twitter 1.0 for being a hate group that's transphobic. Yeah, I know.
Jeez.
I know. That's what we've literally been doing. Like, how many times I've been told I'm part of a hate group when I ask them why we're a hate group? Because we're transphobic. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, this is odd, but okay.
This is going to make it a little interesting of a conversation, but let's go.
No.
But yeah, thank you for all the support. Thank you for
course.
having these conversations. All the love.
Of course. And thank you so much for coming on and having the conversation. I know this is not an easy situation. It's, and it gets more and more difficult as it goes on, apparently. It shows no signs of slowing or easing up. And I would like to get you back on when there's some updates, and you're always more than welcome on this platform.
Well, I appreciate that. I look forward to coming back.
Yeah, anytime. If everyone's still watching, make sure and go check out what they have going on. All of the links are in the episode description. And if you follow my social media, which you should, then you'll be seeing posts I'm sure I'll be retweeting and liking. So from this point, make sure to hit that like, share, subscribe button. And we've got some extra shows coming up, trying to squeeze in a couple more before the end of the year. Got some good philosophical conversations coming up, and trying to highlight what everyone else has going on in the liberty movement, the freedom space, because this is what it's about. And we're all trying to hope for and fight for a better world. And that's what's important to me. That's what is important to the people I like to highlight. So thank you once again, Freya, and everyone else.